Most of you who follow this channel will know that I am bisexual, and you will know that I have been in relationships with both men and women. And it's a topic that I have never necessarily hidden on the channel, but it's not something that I've ever delved into in any great detail. I've never talked about my own sexual identity and my experience of that and my progression throughout my teens and 20s of figuring that out and really coming to own that label of bisexual. This is going to be another of those videos that doesn't pertain directly to spirituality, but I do feel that all issues surrounding personal identity link back in some way to a spiritual practice that is reflective of who we really are and connects to a lot of the struggles that we face when we are extricating ourselves maybe from past religious traditions that we have been raised in or a part of that have repressed our personal identity or our personal experience in some way. So I thought that I would make this video, seeing as it's Pride Month, it seemed like a good time to talk about this, and I know that a disproportionate amount of members of the pagan and alternative spirituality community are actually LGBTQIA. Very high percentage actually, probably because many of us do come out of traditional religions that have suppressed our sexual identities, that have not been supportive of who we are and what we experience as sexual beings and just as ourselves. We are looking towards finding a religion or spirituality that embraces us fully, that allows us to be who we are fully without having to change ourselves in any way in order to fit in. So it's no surprise that this community has more of the LGBTQIA plus community in it. So I feel that this video is going to be relevant for a certain percentage of you, which is great. And even for those of you who are not yourselves LGBT plus, I think that many of you also will be allies and that you might be interested to hear my experience in this realm. There are so many different ways that I could approach this topic, and I don't want to get too hung up on this video being, you know, the video on my channel that answers all questions or deals with all issues surrounding being LGBTQIA+. I will point you in the direction though of a video by Kellyanne Maddox that she posted about a year and a half ago. It's called LGBTQIA+ Pride and Self-Love or something like that. I'm going to link that up above and down below and all the places so that you can, I think it's this side, isn't it? So that you can find that easily, because I feel that she has gone into more detail about giving you advice on your own journey of acceptance and self-love in this arena. And I don't think I'm going to focus so much on that and on giving advice. I think I'm going to focus more on just talking to you about my journey and my own experiences, and if that's something that you're looking for, I would highly recommend her video. But I think the main reason that I'm not looking to give advice in this arena is because I myself have not really been fully comfortable in my sexuality and with my sexual identity for as long as Kellyanne has been. I mean, she says in her video that she has been identifying as a bisexual since she was, I think, 14 or 15 years old. So that's nearly 20 years. Whereas for me, it's, as I will explain, it's been a little bit more convoluted, and I did not spend most of my life feeling as though I was part of that community and feeling as though I had a place at the table, so to speak. So I think that I'm still in that journey. I'm still going through that process maybe of self-acceptance and embracing that part of my identity. So I don't have as much advice necessarily to give, but I still think that my personal experience might be relevant and that there might be things that I have to say that might help you along your journey of self-acceptance as well. I think one of the first things to say about being bisexual, as opposed to any other of the many other identities that fall under that umbrella, whether it's sexual identities or gender identities, I think one of the primary things to say, first of all, is that well, there are very mixed perceptions across society of bisexual people, and I think that many people will know and be aware that bisexual erasure is still an ongoing issue. It's a weird ongoing problem and it's something that frustrates me a lot, and I will talk about that a bit more in this video as well. And I think part of the reason, there are many different reasons for that, I believe, but part of the problem, I think, is that there's a certain tendency for perhaps other people under the LGBTQIA plus umbrella to think of bisexual people as having straight privilege. And that, to a very large extent, is actually true. Like, we do have straight privilege to the extent that often we will end up in straight relationships. I know that a lot of people don't really like that terminology, but that we end up in not same-sex relationship or not queer, you know what I'm saying. We end up in a relationship with the opposite gender to us in a heteronormative relationship, and then therefore we pass as straight, or at least we have the option to. But I do think that it's kind of dangerous to start talking about having the option to pass as straight as a bisexual person, because it's tantamount to this understanding that a lot of people have, and especially homophobic people might have, of different sexual identities and of being queer in general. And I'm going to use queer as a bit of an umbrella term. It's a term that I personally like, and I do consider myself to be queer. So again, apologies if that's not a term that you like, but it's something that I like, so I will use that quite broadly in this video. But yeah, I think that idea that being queer is a choice of some kind, that we make a choice to act on certain feelings or not act on them, is problematic. And it's obviously different with somebody who's bi, because it's easier to say to yourself, okay, I'm just not going to explore that part of my sexuality, I'm not going to explore the queer part of my sexuality, I'm going to remain straight passing, I'm going to stay in these heteronormative situations. To some degree you can make that choice when you're going out and looking for a life partner, but at the end of the day, sometimes we just fall in love. Sometimes we fall in love with someone that we're not expecting to fall in love with, and that's not a choice necessarily. We can maybe choose not to be in a relationship with that person, but we don't choose who we fall in love with or who we feel attracted to. So yes, I think moving in the world, often we have straight privilege if we are in heterosexual relationships, or hetero, you know. Again, I don't want to annoy anyone with using that terminology, because I don't mind describing same-sex and not same-sex relationships as straight and gay relationships, but I know it annoys some people. So that's my first point I wanted to make, was that yes, we have some straight privilege, but I think that bisexual people, or being bisexual or pansexual, comes with its own set of issues. And I think one of the things that we experience, I hesitate to say more than other people in the umbrella, under the umbrella, but that we certainly experience a lot, is sexual confusion and identity confusion, and a lot of doubt and uncertainty around whether we're allowed to identify a certain way and whether we are a certain way. And so I'm annoyed with myself now that I didn't save this at all. I just went looking for it on Instagram, and it's no longer available, and I didn't save this at all. But anyway, Carrie Mallon on Instagram recently shared a TikTok by, I don't remember who it was. I seem to remember that they were a femme black queer person who was talking about bisexuality on TikTok, but honestly, I can't remember who they were. But they were making a point that I had already made very recently about bisexuality and people's perceptions of being queer. And which was that I have a theory, and I think I'm obviously not alone in this theory, seeing as this person also had this theory independently of me, that a huge amount of people are actually bi or pan without realising it. That probably the population is full of just a much larger percentage than we realise, or then actually identify as such. And because we often end up having conversations with people who are perhaps a little homophobic, who don't really understand, or who just are not open to the idea, saying things like, and the quote that, I hesitate to say she because I don't remember who they were, but the quote that they used was somebody saying, oh, well, you know, something about choosing to be gay, and, you know, I find men attractive, but I chose to be with your mother. So, you know, clearly I was able to choose to be straight. So why can't gay people just choose to be straight? And that made them think to themselves, well, then is this person actually bisexual or pansexual? And is that what has led to them perceiving sexuality as a choice? Now, I have definitely wondered this in the past myself. I feel that probably for at least some people, if not a lot of people, who are really invested in this idea of sexuality being a choice, that you can choose to turn away from same-sex feelings, that surely they actually are so at least somewhat bisexual or pansexual. If that has been their own experience, it implies that has been their experience, that they have experienced their sexuality as a choice. And I think the only arena in which we can actually see sexuality as being any kind of choice is when we are bi or pan, and we make a conscious decision to not act on attraction towards a certain gender and to act on attraction towards a different gender. And this has obviously led to a common misperception of sexuality and how it works. So yeah, I think that this big conundrum that comes along with being bi or pan it definitely can lead to straight privilege. It can lead to people just living their lives as straight people and never engaging with that part of their identity. Or it can also lead to huge amounts of confusion, and often it's both. I would feel that at least half of the people that I have met that are attracted to more than just the gender opposite to them, that have a broader spectrum of sexual or romantic attraction, I'd say at least half of them have either very recently been coming to terms with the fact that they are and do identify as bi or pan, or they are still actively renouncing that label. And sometimes it's out of denial, and I don't want to speak for anyone else's experience, but I would suspect sometimes that these people are repressing something in themselves. And then even more often than that, I find that especially women who have said to me, you know, I am attracted to girls. I definitely find girls attractive. I find them very sexy. I'm very attracted to girls. I would even maybe date a girl, but I never have. I've never really acted on it. I've kissed a girl, or I've done something slightly, you know, I've tried, I've dabbled, I've put my toe into the water and I like it. You know, I kissed a girl and I like it, kind of thing. But I've never been in a relationship, so therefore I have no right to call myself bi. I've had quite a number of different women say that to me, or different versions of that. And I just think it's probably important for both gay and straight people to be aware that this is a huge conundrum that bi and pan people who are somewhere in the middle of the sexuality spectrum, that they face, that we actually do face this. Not to say that straight and gay people don't ever question their sexual identity, that they don't ever have conundrums and even shift and change over time. Absolutely, I fully will accept that is a possibility. But it's definitely more common for bi and pan people to really struggle and to really question and to really self-repress an awful lot, and ultimately have a harder time coming to figure out where the heck we actually fit into society and how to describe and define ourselves. And yeah, I think that's where this idea of straight privilege comes, because it's just easier for us often to just say we're straight. So I think that segues quite nicely into my own story, my own experience, because I have definitely experienced this. I too was one of those girls at one time who probably, if pressed or if asked, would have said, well, yeah, you know, I like girls and I've, you know, dipped my toe into the water, but you know, I've never been in a relationship with a girl. I've never really been with a girl. I don't think I can call myself bi. I don't know if I really am. I don't know if I'm just mostly straight but not fully straight. And I want to say now as well that, like, if that's you and that's where you're at, I think it's important to note as well that I'm not saying that everyone needs to get to the point of identifying themselves as being bi or pan. That's really not what I mean either. I just want to make that very clear. I think the label isn't the important thing, right? Like, I don't think anyone needs, just because I perceive somebody as being bi, I will perceive them as being bi because that's the label that I have chosen to describe my experience. And if I see somebody having what looks like the same experience as me, in my head I'm going to kind of brand them as bi. But if they don't identify in that way, I'm not going to outwardly say that to them or of them. And I will totally accept if they want to label themselves as being mostly straight. That's totally fine. And if that's a label that you're comfortable with, I mean, labels are just so arbitrary. We use them just as a shortcut, as a code to explain to people quickly where we fit in, and also to decide what communities we feel we do want to fit in with. And I think they are there to be used. They're not there to be beating ourselves up with. So I'm by no means saying that you are not going to be, that it's a sign that you're not happy or not content with yourself if you haven't got to a point of being able to accept that you're bi. I think, but even in people, I think, who are not necessarily on a trajectory of going from identifying as straight to identifying as bi or pan, I think even within those people who maybe do settle on happily on thinking of themselves as being mostly straight or something like that, I think there still is that tendency to struggle and to doubt and to question and so on. And that's really what I'm talking about, more than whatever label it is that you end up with. But from my own personal experience, I definitely felt happier in myself and felt more fully myself, and like I was expressing myself more fully and was hiding less of myself when I did start to identify outwardly as bisexual. So I'm just going to tell you the story in a linear fashion. Basically, when I was about 6 or 7 years old, I think was when I first had a crush on another girl. I mean, probably when I was a bit younger as well. But I think that was the age when I started to have crushes on boys as well. But I never identified my first crush on a girl as being anything to do with being a crush, because I think at that age, your crushes are... There's very little sexuality involved at that young, tender age. It's more about a fascination with a certain person and feeling very drawn to them, and you're still navigating that and trying to figure out what it is and what it means. And there is a vocabulary often for telling little girls that they fancy a boy, or that they want to kiss him, and then that idea gets planted in your head, and then you're more readily able to think to yourself, oh yeah, maybe I do want to kiss him, or maybe I do like him or want to spend time with him. And we're not offered that vocabulary, at least when I was a child, when I was growing up in the 90s. We weren't offered that vocabulary as girls, that we might feel that way towards another girl. So my first crush was on a girl who was a year ahead of me in school. She was 2 years older, because I was so young for my year. And I just thought I wanted to be her. But not just be her, I wanted to be her friend. I had a crush on her. It's as simple as that. But all I understood from it was just that I had this huge admiration for this older girl, and to the point where I dragged my mum out to the shops one time because I wanted to buy an outfit that was similar to an outfit that she wore to school a lot. It must have been towards the summer months, because we were allowed to wear our own clothes to school in the last month of summer. We had a uniform the rest of the year. So I specifically remember going out and buying this outfit because I wanted to be emulating her. But it wasn't really so much about being her as being, I wanted to be accepted by her. I thought that maybe by dressing more like her and acting more like her, that she would notice me and maybe befriend me, and that I would have that opportunity to speak and be close to her. Never happened. I don't think I ever had a conversation with her in my entire life, and like life moved on. And I didn't think anything of it. And then a few years later, when I was about 11, was the first time that I started to notice that I was hitting puberty at that time. So I hit puberty when I was about 10, turning 11. And so at that point, I think crushes were starting to move more towards actual sexuality. That's the age when you start to feel sexual feelings, and you start to have a more conscious understanding. You know more about sex, you know more about what adults get up to, and you are starting to have an idea of, like, or at least for me anyway, this is not the case for all children, but I think everyone navigates this in their own time, but you're starting to get an idea of, like, well, when I might want to do those kinds of things, who are the people that might trigger that idea in me, or that seem appealing to me in that way. And definitely wanting to kiss people was a lot more overt at that point. And some of the kids in my class at that age were dating. I mean, they were going to the movies and holding hands kind of thing at that age. So some of them had girlfriends and boyfriends in my class. And I developed a huge crush. I developed my first real feelings for another person at that age. I really had very strong feelings for a boy in my class who I was friendly with, but he had a girlfriend, and, you know, it was all very, very dramatic. My first experience of unrequited love. I don't think it was actually unrequited exactly. I think he liked me too, but I mean, at that age, he was 12, you know. But at the same age, so I was very aware. I was very aware that I liked boys. There was no doubt in my mind whatsoever that I liked this boy in particular, that I had liked other boys too. But I first started to notice that there was at least one girl in my class anyway that I found attractive. And I was just totally bewildered by this. I remember thinking to myself, but I'm not gay, because I knew what being gay was, but I knew that I wasn't. But nobody had told me about being bi. Nobody had told me that being bisexual was a thing, that it was possible to be bi. All I knew was that some people liked the same sex as them, some people liked the opposite sex, and that was literally all I knew. And being gay, or, you know, being a lesbian or being gay, being queer in general, was still being... My parents were always very liberal and very accepting of queer people, and there was never any language in my household that was suggesting that it was a bad thing to be that way. But I was still growing up in a culture in 90s Ireland, late 90s Ireland, where being gay, being queer was still seen as this very unusual, very, very niche minority thing. And yeah, there was nobody who was talking about being bi or being pan or anything like that. I don't think I even heard the term pansexual for another decade or more. So I had nothing to gauge my feelings on, and it was very confusing to me. And I didn't really think about it too much for a few years. I don't even remember at the point at which I first heard the word bi, but I think it was a few years later after that when I developed my first pretty serious crush on a girl. It was a girl that I was very friendly with in school. And I'd say, I would go so far as to say I was kind of in love with her. And we developed this very fast moving, very close friendship. We would call each other on the phone. I mean, it was a classic, to some degree, it was a classic teenage girl friendship. We were about 13, 14 at the time, where we would, come home from school and pick up the phone and immediately sit on the phone and talk to each other for the rest of the evening. But I started again to feel very confused about this. Again, I was very aware that I had crushes on other boys, and I was very confused. And I think at that point we had the internet. So I was able to, I think I probably Googled, like, I like boys and girls, help, kind of thing, like, what's going on. And that's when I first discovered that being bi, that people out there were identifying as bisexual. And I remember reading that for the first time, and it was very similar to the first time that I remember a few years earlier or around the same age. No, I think when I was a little bit younger, when I was about 10, reading something in a book about depression and thinking to myself, oh, that sounds like what I have. And then immediately thinking, no, that's an exaggeration. Like surely that's for people who are more extremely that than I am. And for some reason, with both of those labels, with both of those experiences in life, it took me a long time to accept that that was indeed what I was accepting, and that I was worthy of using these words to describe myself, and that what I was experiencing was good enough or enough, strong enough, a big enough deal to consider, talking to a doctor about being depressed, having depression, and then in terms of my sexuality, considering myself as being bisexual. So when I first encountered the word, I wasn't really interested in going down that road. I think I wanted an easier life as well. Honestly, it was easier for myself to think of myself as straight. But it wasn't too long after that, a few years later, I had some friends when I was about 15, 16, 17, 18. Those years, I started to have some friends, some female friends who identified as bi. And that was the first time that I really started to toy with the idea. I can remember telling one of my best friends, at that time we were standing waiting to get on a train, I think, to go home, and I turned around and said to him, I think I'm bi too. And he just was like, yeah, like, okay. And then I think I outed myself to that group of friends that I had at that time, and it was just accepted. I kissed some girls around that time. And it was just generally accepted in our group of friends that I was one of the girls who was bisexual, and it wasn't a big deal at all. And that was helpful to me, definitely very helpful to me at that time, to start accepting. And then I was able to retrospectively look back on the experiences that I'd had prior to that and think, yeah, like, that's normal. And like, of course I had crushes, because there were a few girls before that, not just that first one. The strangest thing is, though, that even though I had outed myself essentially to all of my closest friends at that time when I was in my mid to late teens, it didn't stick. And by the time I went to college, when I was 17 turning 18, I kind of stopped outing myself as bi. I didn't really talk about it anymore. I continued to occasionally have crushes on different girls that I met, but maybe not as much. I didn't have any major feelings for any girls while I was in college, any of my friends or anything. So maybe that's why it just didn't become an issue. But for some reason, I never outed myself, I don't think. No, I didn't. To my college friends. And my school friends, to a large extent, we lost touch. I kept in touch with a small handful of them, but not enough for it to still feel like a big part of my identity. It felt like I became a different person when I went to college and did my undergraduate degree. And yeah, like I say, I wasn't out. And I had to out myself to my boyfriend when we had been together for, I think, more than a year, my college boyfriend. I remember telling him that I was bi and being so nervous when I was telling him. Much more nervous, strangely, than I had been telling my best friend back in school. Maybe I was less sure of his reaction because he didn't seem to have any queer friends. And yeah, it was just a bit daunting. And he was totally fine with it and had no problem and was very supportive. And he actually later on strongly encouraged me when we were breaking up the second time. He strongly encouraged me that he thought that I should explore my sexuality more, and that he thought it would be really good for me if I tried being in a relationship with a woman, and that I really just went out there and just really expressed that part of my my sexuality. And I think he was right. I think it was a really positive thing for me to do. So I think that pretty much brings us up to when I was 25, 26 and heading to Edinburgh. I think when I did my first master's degree when I was about 22, 23, I think I was starting to sometimes say, I think I told my closest friends there that I was bi. I had a little bit of a crush on one of the girls in my year, and it wasn't a huge part of my identity, but I was starting to drop it into conversation occasionally after a long time. But then, yeah, so then me and that college boyfriend, we had gotten back together, we broke up again, I moved to Edinburgh, and that was the first time I think I had just made much more of a solid decision that I was no longer just looking for men to be in relationships with, that I wanted to try dating girls. I wanted to, really explore that part of myself. And I said to one of my closest female friends here before, distinctly remember saying to her, like, I want to have a girlfriend while I'm in Edinburgh. I don't know how long I'm going to be there, but I want to have a girlfriend. And I think as soon as I moved to Edinburgh, I started to immediately out myself. I mean, not in the first conversation, but once I developed a friendship with somebody, once it became relevant at all to bring up in conversation, I started outing myself. I started just saying that I was bisexual, not just saying, oh, I like some girls, or I'm not totally straight, which I think was how I tended to word it earlier on. But I finally started to just drop it into conversation. And then 6 months later, I got together with my ex-girlfriend. I finally actually got into a relationship with another woman. It's worth mentioning, I think, that up to this point, I had not come out to my family at all. My parents, I don't think, had any idea. And I don't really know why. I don't really know why I had never talked to my family about it. I think it always just felt a bit like, and this is another weird part about being bi or pan, I think, is that sometimes you feel a bit like it's not anyone's business. And I think that's fine as well. I think if again, I don't necessarily think that being out to everyone in your life is a necessary component of being happy with yourself or being confident and secure and self-loving in your identity. Because to some degree, I suppose that's true. Like, and if you are in heterosexual or, heteronormative relationships for your whole life, maybe there isn't so much of a need to be telling everyone in your life if that's not something that you want to do. And I think that's how it felt to me. It felt, because I was in relationships with men, it didn't really feel like it was relevant to say to my parents. It just felt very personal or something, like say to them, by the way, I fancy girls too. Just thought you'd want to know. And it's kind of silly to say that, and it's only looking back on it that it feels silly that I just never decided to have a conversation with them and come out. But I never did. And I suppose up until that point, even though I had started to tell friends that I was bi, I really hadn't started to consider myself as being part of the QIA plus. I usually just say LGBT plus just for brevity. I just hadn't thought of myself as being part of the queer community. I just didn't. Because again, that idea of I haven't had that experience, so therefore I have no right to talk about being bi, because, which is silly, but I think I'll talk about that a little bit more once I've got through my whole story. So that was the point when I told them, was when I actually got into a relationship with another girl, and I came out to them over Skype, and it was fine. It was completely fine. And then my family just gradually found out just through being told that I was in a relationship. I don't know that I ever actually said to anyone in my family directly, like, I am bisexual. Possibly some of them think I'm gay now. I guess they'll find out if I get back into a relationship with another man again. I guess then they'll realise that I'm not actually gay. But it's one of those slightly awkward things. It felt easier just to say, oh, I'm in a relationship with a woman now, than to say I am bi. Which, again, a bit silly, but it seemed like relevant to let them know that I'm in one particular relationship with a particular person. And, they met her and they all really loved her and everything. And nobody in my immediate family that I am in touch with had any problem whatsoever, as far as I could tell, which I wasn't, and I wasn't expecting them to. And that brings us pretty much up to today, because there hasn't really been any progression since then. I think being in that relationship, it lasted nearly 2 years. I think being in that relationship really was the kind of final experience that I needed to start to really fully embrace that part of myself. And I think I went a little bit more gay in that time. I was expressing more of my queerness, I guess, than I usually do. I had my hair short already at that time, and I had my undercut, and I think that was actually part of expressing that part of myself. It helped me start to express that part of myself, and at the time I thought it was a permanent change. I thought I just liked having short hair, and I think it was just that I needed to be gay me for a while. I like to think of myself as, obviously as a whole, I'm bisexual and that's my full identity, but I like sometimes to think of myself as having like, there's straight me and there's gay me, because you know the way we go through different moods and different experiences in life, and we day to day often we can feel like a slightly different person. And I think gay me had gotten quite repressed for quite a long time, and she just needed some expression. She really needed to not only be in a same-sex relationship, but also to dress a little bit more androgynously and have more androgynous hair and just act a bit more queer. Let's express more of that part of my personality for a period in my life. And I think that after that, I think once I started to grow my hair out more and start to wear dresses a bit more and that kind of thing, which sounds really superficial, but I think once I started to do that again, I was able to bring together two different sides or multiple different parts of my personality more coherently, and to express myself more fully, having embraced those other parts of myself that had gotten largely repressed, that I had never explored. And I know that those parts of me are still in me and can still get tapped into, even if I'm not tapping into them on a daily basis anymore. And obviously I have no idea going forward who I might end up in a relationship with in the future. It's all completely up in the air. I'm fully single at the moment. Obviously the pandemic has not happened, helped with that. The last two men that I was not in a relationship with, but the last two people that I've been involved with, that's probably the best word, have been men, but obviously I'm not in any way close to dating women again in the future. I don't really mind. Yeah, so okay, before we keep going, that's my story. I've just noticed there that I said directly men and women. I wanted to point out as well that like the bisexual, pansexual issue, I don't call myself bisexual because I have any problem with non-cisgendered or non-binary people, or that I wouldn't be attracted to them. That's not the case at all. It's just the word that I first stumbled on, honestly, and I think it gets used most broadly to define people who are not just attracted to the opposite sex. And that's how I understand it. I've seen people describe bisexual as meaning attracted to both your own gender and other genders, and that's pretty much how I look at it as well. It's not just cis men and cis women. I just wanted to make that clear. Those are the people that I have historically dated, but there's no particular reason for that. It's just that I don't actually really know that many trans or non-binary people. And just because somebody identifies as bi doesn't mean that they have any problem with the idea of dating non-cisgender or non-binary people and so on. So the reason I wanted to tell you this story really was to just demonstrate to you the complications sometimes of the journey of accepting your sexual identity, of embracing a particular label, of finding a label that works for you, of navigating coming out, not coming out. But I just wanted to give you an idea of what that journey has looked like, in case maybe you're somewhere along the line, or you've had a parallel experience, or maybe it's helpful for someone to hear what it has been like for me. And I think also, to be completely honest, because I don't hear enough of this. I hear a lot of people on YouTube maybe, or because I seek them out. I watch a lot of videos, or some videos anyway, of people talking about their bisexual experience and how they realised that they were bisexual, and talking about embracing it and accepting it. And I think we don't hear enough of that. One thing that frustrates me hugely is how often we see main characters in TV shows and films who do seem to be bisexual or pansexual, and that label never gets used. And I think that would be fine now and then, because like I say, not everyone is necessarily going to ever want to use those labels. everyone has their own experience and everyone has their own feelings around particular labels, and that's fine. But my problem is that it's almost never that these labels get used for primary characters, and we might have tertiary characters being described as being bi or pan, but the main characters mostly it's, and I feel actually almost like, and maybe that's not true, maybe I just gravitate towards shows and films that have bi or pan characters as the lead characters. I was going to say that we almost have more of them. Maybe in very mainstream media we see more bisexual people, especially people who have come out of of straight relationships and are now entering into a new same-sex relationship, whether it's for the first time or not. We see a lot of those journeys being navigated, and I think it's wonderful to see it on film. It's wonderful to have that represented. But it doesn't get talked about, it doesn't get labelled, which I do think, like I say, it's useful to at least discuss it. And I think if the character is deciding that they're not going to label themselves in that way, it would be useful to maybe hear them say that and have them talk about it and just say, well, you know what, I don't want to just define myself as being bi, that just doesn't suit me. But, you know, I hate that it never gets talked about. And oftentimes the viewer is left to assume, if they don't know any better, that perhaps this person has turned gay. And sometimes it is ambiguous. Sometimes we're not sure, like, well, were they actually unfilled and unfulfilled and in their previous relationships or not? Like, what's going on here? What's happening in the inner world of this character? Like, oftentimes it's left completely ambiguous. And I find that very frustrating, and I can see how that plays into people's confusion when it comes to their sexual identity, especially when they are bi or pan, because it's being implied to them that it is a confusing thing to be, for example, only in straight relationships for your whole life, and then to suddenly enter into a same-sex relationship, to meet somebody and realize that you want to embark on a relationship with them. It's posed as this, like, oh, are you gay now? kind of thing. And I think if you have a character in a TV show or a film, ask the lead character, are you gay now? When it needs to be discussed. I don't think you can just have people say that and just accept that, well, this is something that people say, and just not address it. So I just wanted to bring that up because it's something that is perpetually frustrating to me. It's gotten to the point where I'm almost convinced that there's an embargo on the word bisexual, like on certain TV channels, because it's the only explanation that I can think of to explain why it just, like, nobody uses that word. It's very confusing to me. And I also wanted to, and I know that my own story actually perpetuates this tendency, but I also wanted to argue against this tendency that people have it's almost like you're straight until proven otherwise, like to deny people's sexual identities, or for people to not want to embrace a different label for their sexual identity until or unless they've had either sex with a member of the same gender or that they have been in a relationship. Sometimes it's that they just haven't been in a full-blown relationship and they haven't had the hardships of being in a queer relationship, so therefore they can't speak to that experience. And people will have their own ideas of how far along the line, I guess, they've had to go, how much of that experience they've had to have in order to consider themselves as being bi or being pan. And I really wanted to speak out against that tendency. It annoys me greatly, and you see a lot of gatekeeping over sexual identity online. Sometimes of people basically suggesting that somebody is not bisexual because they doubt that they've ever been in a sexual or romantic relationship with another woman or another man, and that frustrates me hugely, because it's not about that. We're not. If our culture tended to not consider us straight until we'd had a sexual or a romantic relationship with a member of the opposite sex, then I would understand that idea more. And if we were just considered asexual or aromantic until we'd had an experience, then that would make sense. But that's not how we understand sexuality to work when it's straight sexuality. And so there shouldn't be a double standard there. And I just wanted to emphasize to anyone watching this that if you are doubting this or confused or feeling that you don't have the right to call yourself queer or bi or pan or gay or any label at all because you haven't had a certain experience yet, I would really want to emphasize that there's unfortunately, maybe there are some people out there who are going to tell you that you can't use that label, but most people are not going to say that. Like if that is how you are feeling, if you know that this is how you feel about other people, if these have been your internal experiences, just because you haven't had outward experiences doesn't mean that they're not valid, doesn't mean that they're not real. And you could go your whole life without having a sexual or a romantic experience, and you would still be your sexual orientation. It just frustrates me that is still something that we see people say quite a lot. And unfortunately, my own experience really backs that up. Like that, I tended to shy away from using that terminology, like calling myself bisexual or outing myself until I was in a relationship. But I am quite glad that I did start to very widely out myself as being bi before I got into a same-sex relationship. I'm quite pleased that I got to that point, and I think the two things, it's probably no surprise that one came before the other, that I had to embrace the fact that I was bi before I was really ready to be in that relationship, and it was a very serious relationship. There was nothing casual about it, and maybe I wouldn't have been ready for that if I hadn't previously really accepted my sexual identity. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think there's anything wrong with going your whole life saying that you're straight and then having an experience like that and then saying, okay, I'm bi or I'm gay, or, you know, changing your mind based on an experience, on a physical or actual social experience rather than an internal one. But I just want to emphasize again and again just how much I think that it's important for us to validate our own internal experiences, our own feelings, our own subjectivities. They are important. We live with them every single day and they are valid. But I would really encourage anyone to have a think. If you are queer in some way, whether or not you use that term to describe yourself, if you are queer in any way, if you are thinking about this, I would really just encourage you to think about how you want to out yourself, if you want to out yourself, and how you want to present yourself in that way to society. To what extent do you want to be continually outing yourself, and just take ownership over that and be conscious of it, I think, and maybe have a little think about it and think about the way that you tend to do it, who you do it with, who you don't. I think it's always good to make these decisions conscious, or to at least think it through a bit, and to consider our behaviour in that way, because it can point us towards discomforts that we might still have with ourselves. And it's also a good way to make sure that we don't maybe out ourselves and then regret it or feel uncomfortable with the way that it came up in a conversation. It gives us a lot more power as we move through the world. If we've already decided before we enter into a certain space or have a conversation with a certain person, if we've already decided how and when and under what circumstances we might decide to out ourselves to them, I think that is really powerful. And it's something that, you know, I still find myself in situations sometimes where I find myself thinking, you know what, I'm not going to out myself to this person. I'm going to use gender neutral pronouns to describe my previous partners, and I'm just not going to until I just decide that I feel like I'm at a comfortable place where that feels safe for me. And that's unfortunately something I still need to do, and but it is something that I tend to reflect on afterwards. And I sometimes ask myself, was that really necessary? Like, do I really think that this is not a safe environment for me to out myself, or do I have some more work to do? Maybe do we need to think a bit more about why I'm uncomfortable with being out and proud in front of older members of the population, maybe people my parents' age, and so on. So I'm going to leave it there because I've been talking for quite a long time, but I feel like this is a bit of an overdue video. Like I say, it doesn't relate directly to spirituality, and I didn't really touch on problems relating to religion in this video. But if this is something that you'd like me to talk about, again, I absolutely will do. My own problems with my sexuality didn't actually arise from my religious upbringing as Catholic. It didn't. I think it came more from wider society rather than rather than any specific religious doctrine. But I know that many of you have definitely had a religious doctrine imposed on you that has suggested that your sexuality is not okay, and that can be difficult to heal from. And I would definitely be willing to speak to that to some degree in a video in the future, even though it's not something that I have a huge amount of experience with myself. And just if you have any questions in general that you would like me to address in a future video, absolutely do leave them down below, or if you just, I can just answer you in a comment if it doesn't require a video response. But I'm going to leave it there for today. I think that's a good enough intro to the topic, and I want to wish you all a happy Pride Month, and I hope that you're all doing well, and yeah, I'll talk to you again soon.